Conferee's rules are available to all of the members out here. I know things that go on outside this room, that's not part of the committee, but in this room, definitely. And I just want a quick reminder on the decorum in the building. You know, that's one of the things that makes this facility work so well. And I'd like to thank our law enforcement officials that are here. And thank you for joining us. I know he's very subtle and quiet today, but we do have one of the highway patrolmen in here today. So thank you for all you do. Committee, we're going to go to bill request. Senator Peck.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I do have a request for a committee bill. The RS number is 26 RS 2961. And this is legislation enacting the Healthcare Sharing Ministries Tax Deduction Act to provide for a subtraction modification for qualified healthcare sharing ministry expenses paid by a qualified individual, etc. It goes on. It's just.
Thank you, Senator Peck. Any questions? Any objection? We'll make the bill request. I have one for the committee. It's excluding the buyer's premium from the sale price of property purchased at an auction, RS 2639. Any questions? Any objection? We'll make the request. Well, committee, we're going to pick up with the hearing on 1616. We did finish with the opponents. I didn't have anybody else that came in and wanted to testify in opposition. There is written opponent testimony. I don't have the copy. Okay, thank you. John just does a great job. He had everything up here. I just didn't see it. So we'll pick up with the conferees. We're going to go to Ellen Rydell. She's online. Ellen? In committee, I know this is a little different. We are going back to the proponents. We let the opponents speak as much as they needed to yesterday. So we'll finish up with the proponents today. If she's not there, we'll go on with Dave.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
Okay, I'm sorry. Technology. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Happy New Year. My name is Ellen Riedel, and I'm a realtor with Coldwell Banker Executive Realty in Hayes. I live in Ellis. I'm here today in favor of the 3% cap on property assessed valuation, SCR 1616. Last year, I testified with my story, but today I'd like to share with you stories from people in my community. A couple Sundays ago, I was walking my dog and a woman driving by stopped and shared with me her story. You see, her husband has been ill for the past couple years. Thankfully, it looks like he's going to be okay. But that doesn't help with the fact that her property taxes have become overly burdensome. She also shared with me that her neighbor, who is elderly and widowed, told her that she probably won't be able to afford to live in her home maybe over the course of this next year. So as a side note, I would like to say that rather than valuing our seniors, we are discarding them. And I think we should really be ashamed of ourselves. Last week, I went to a listing appointment with a young family whose children are enrolled in our public schools, who spend money locally, but he is interviewing in another state because the cost of living in Kansas has become too high, primarily property taxes. Commercial property is equally important. Kansas business owners need relief, and we need it yesterday. I have clients that own restaurants that you can only increase a food cost in X amount before people quit coming into your doors. Yesterday, I heard it said that property taxes are simply a result of a formula. You guys, this one's easy. If we don't like the outcome of the formula, we simply need to change the formula. And I really liked the example of the 2 guardrails. This cap would be an excellent way to put up one of those guardrails. It was also suggested that such a cap would discourage new construction and home improvements. I strongly disagree. People don't decide to build or improve their homes because they want higher property taxes. They do it to meet their needs of their growing families or to invest in their futures. What actually discourages people is the uncertainty and fear that improving their homes will actually price them right out of it. A reasonable cap provides predictability, stability, and fairness, especially for seniors and families on fixed incomes and young families trying to put down roots. I would also like to reiterate that this type of cap is already working in other states, such as in Oklahoma. But what is exciting about this bill and makes it even better than what Oklahoma has in place is the transferability that it gives the new buyers. So if we want people to actually move into Kansas and people to continue buying and selling homes, this is actually a marketable point. I encourage you to support this 3% bill. I encourage you to listen to your constituents who voted for you, not the lobbyists. Membership in the Kansas Association of Realtors does not mean that the individual realtor agrees with every viewpoint or policy advanced by the organization. It is therefore misleading to suggest that this association, which represents 10,000 realtors, uniformly oppose this bill. It would actually be interesting to see the data or survey results that support such a claim. I appreciate your time and your consideration, and I stand for questions. I'm hoping that we can discuss this transferability a little bit more because it's huge.
Well, thank you, Ellen, and I apologize for
welcome.
not getting your name correct. Committee questions? Wow, this is rare. So is there a comment you want to make on the transferability or?
Well, actually, I kind of do because I think it's so important for people to understand the impact that this would make. So if we have a little bit of time, I'd like to kind of go over like the current situation and what this would do in an example. So let's pretend with an example that my property is assessed at $100,000. Okay. I make improvements to it and I decide to sell it. And we have someone coming in from, let's say, California or Colorado with cash. They don't ask for an appraisal and the house ends up selling for $150,000. Okay. Our current situation is now the assessed value has now risen to that. And in Ellis County, I would argue that by the time they get their tax bill, it's probably even higher. Unfortunately for my neighbor who has not made any improvements to their property, it's now going to be compared to the new purchase price or even the higher price, which it will be assessed at. What this bill does is, let's take the same situation. My home assessed at $100,000. I do the same improvements. The same buyer comes in from California, doesn't want an appraisal, pays $150,000 for it. The new buyer's taxable valuation can only increase to $103,000. This is a game changer. Talk about predictability, stability, and fairness. Takes care of all of it, and it protects the new neighbor or my old neighbor.
Thank you, Ellen. Any other questions? Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just asking if that is not the way I understood this issue. I thought if there was a new sale that the property or constructed? I mean,
If
there's
it's a new
construction.
property, then the new property would be valued as such, but the legislation 1616 is transferable with the sale of the property, and it's transferable, yes.
But then we were also talking about improvements. And so there should,
If there's a remodel, then the appraiser can come in and reset the appraised value will change accordingly. The assessed value could change accordingly with the remodel or an addition, substantial. Yes, and that's the way the current system works. That we're not changing anything with that.
no, but the testimony was that someone could make improvements to their house and that the assessment or the value would not go up. So my understanding is if improvements are made, the value would go up.
No, that's a good question. Thank you for the clarification. There was also a statement made yesterday. You can't correct everything. I mean, I know it's hard to leave it hanging out there, especially for me. But Senate Bill 13 in 2021 that passed, the statement in there was normal maintenance. The valuation of the property does not or should not increase. And so that should be taken care of. If we need to do more, then maybe we have an amendment in this legislation to strengthen that. Okay, any other questions? Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Committee, our next conferee is Dave Trobert. Welcome to the Tax Committee. And thank you for your patience. You started out Tuesday, and here it is Thursday.
That is quite all right, Madam Chair. Dave Trobert, CEO, Kansas Policy Institute. We're pleased to be here in support of SCR 1616. I want to start by referencing something you should have gotten this morning. Yesterday, there was question about how the shift in property tax burden has developed over the years, and we happen to have already had that data pulled. What you see here is from 1997 to 2024, residential property went from paying 39% of the tax burden to 55%. And ironically, everyone else went down. So you can see, like, commercial industrial real estate went up 4, but machinery and equipment went down 8. So there's a net decline in that share. Ag went down from 7% to just 5% of the property tax burden. Mineral leasehold went down 4, state assessed went down 4. Basically, everybody went down and shifted that burden over to residential. And so I just wanted to share that information with you today. In my testimony, there's a chart showing public opinion. And it's anybody who's looked, is familiar with polling data, knows that the shift in this polling data is enormous. In December 2024, there was a 46% net favorability for support of this an assessment limit. Now it's 62. That's a 16-point improvement in favorability in 9 months. We're at 75% of Kansans want an assessment limit. We didn't ask which kind, just do you want an assessment limit? And we're at 75% with only 13% opposed. And it's uniform. Every geographic region, in fact, Western Kansas, where there's a lot of farmers, I might add, it's 80% in favor. It improved huge favorability among self-identified conservatives and moderates and liberals. In fact, the self-identified liberals had a 31% bump in favorability. So why is that? Why are we seeing such an enormous increase? And I'll refer you to the chart in my testimony is a little small, so I brought a little aid here. The blue line here is showing the average increase on a residential property over 2021 to 2024, a 3-year period. It's up 26%. Okay, that's just taking the average, state average. The ability to pay has gone down. That's the red line. That is Bureau of Economic Analysis, personal per capita income adjusted for inflation. It's down 3%. That's the picture of this affordability issue and why people are literally being taxed out of their homes. I mean, basically, this is, you didn't create this problem. Local governments created this problem with their decisions on what to do with mill rates. They're in absolute control. They can't blame it on assessed values. They created the problem, but realistically, only you are going to be able to fix this. They've shown us an unwillingness to do it. Now, I'd also mentioned that in that 26% average, that's just the average. There's 10 counties where that average property tax increase is over 45% in 3 years. Who got a 45% increase in their income? This is just not affordable. It's not even about, we can pretend that all the assessed values are accurate, okay? We know they're not because we know that half at least of the BOTA cases get overturned in favor of the taxpayer. But let's pretend that they're all accurate. This isn't affordable. That's what this really is. It is an affordability issue. I really like the new design of SCR 1616. I think it's resolved a fair number of the concerns that were expressed last year. For example, it's not on, there was concern that this would suppress market values if it was on appraised. This is on assessed taxable value. There's no change in the appraisal. The transferability that we just talked about, that Ellen just talked about, is a huge improvement. And I would, Senator, I believe that what I heard Ellen saying is that yes, she sold that property for $150, but the assessed value limit prevents her neighbor, who also had a $100,000 house, from having his or her value bumped to $150 just because the house next door was sold for that. That happens a lot. So yes, that value would go up, but everybody around it who didn't improve their homes won't get that automatic assessment increase that routinely happens. There were a lot of concerns about market impact. There were concerns about what if this and tax shifts and so forth. But you know what's interesting is and they're legitimate questions to ask, okay? We've had assessment limits in 17 states for over a couple of more decades. If those things actually existed and it had occurred, you'd probably be hearing that. This is what happened in Oklahoma. This is what happened in Texas. This is what happened in whatever state. You didn't. You only heard the what ifs. And so in the absence of that, I think it's a reasonable assumption that those things haven't happened as a result of assessment limits. The tax shift that was talked about yesterday, understandable concern, again, to ask the question, would there be a tax shift in the data that you saw from the KLA? I'm going to show you why that is just a second, I got ahead of myself here. There was a comment about uniform and equal. Well, uniform and equal, now again, I'm only a recovering accountant. I'm not a lawyer. But I think uniform and equal refers to basically the mill rate. Everything gets taxed at the same mill rate. It cannot mean that, that you can have different assessed values, because we have that now. Just look at the assessment ratios. Homes are at 11.5%. Commercial is at 30%. You have all these different, so that's not uniform. That part of variance, the Constitution clearly allows now. Uniform and equal would be in place because we'd all still be paying the same mill rate within the same jurisdiction. School funding formula. it's not determined by the amount of available property tax revenue, and it shouldn't be, because then people in low-valued regions with low property values would never have any school funding. It's based on a formula, excuse me. It's based on a formula that really comes down to enrollment. The property tax is part of what gets used to fulfill that obligation, but if you took in less money from 20 mills, you're going to fill it with more income or sales tax. It's not going to affect the funding that the schools are going to get. I've seen speculation that, I read this, I forget where now, I guess, that a 3% limit would not help low-valued homes. It would only give big benefit to the large-valued homes. You've been outdoor knocking. You've heard from constituents. Who do you get the most complaints from? I know the complaints we hear from are mostly from people who saying, I can't afford my taxes. These aren't high-valued homes. If anything, they're getting hurt the worst, the people with the lower-valued homes, because they have lower incomes. And so I want to look at, we did in order to really try to understand this. And I'll mention, initially, when a few years ago, when talk about assessed limits came up, I was skeptical. Because just intuitively, it's like, well, there's this could happen, that could happen, I don't know. I was skeptical. I changed my mind after I really dug into the data. I mean, dug in. So I'll draw your attention to tables 3 and 4 in my testimony. And what you'll, or I'm sorry, tables 1 and 2. We did a 20-year look back. What would have happened to assessed values if a 3% limit was in place starting in 2005? So we looked at 2005 through 2024. And what we found is that ag values would be, the assessed value in 2024 would be 32% lower than actual, of what it was in 2024. Residential assessed value was 18% lower, and commercial was 21% lower. All that is just applying the 3% limit to actual from PVD. Then we go to tables 3 and 4 and look at what would the tax implications of that be. And so we assume that there would be increases in mill rates. And the average mill rate up to, throughout most of that period was like 0.43%. So we allow the mill rates to go up 5 times that rate, okay? And I don't know what it would be, but we wanted to do something that would say this is maybe conservative. It's going to go up 5 times. And what we find in tables 3 and 4 is that over that 20-year period, ag property taxes would be $1.3 billion lower. Residential and commercial would be $1.7 billion lower, okay? If you look at tables 3 and 4, where we have the tax differences, the comparison. Yesterday, what you saw for Shawnee County from KLA was looking at a period of a 2019 base year through 2024. That happened to be during the period of declining values for ag land. And so a 3% cap wasn't helping ag land those years. But if you go back in history, there's always been kind of a roller coaster. There's been a period of decline and then some enormous double-digit increases. So you have to go back and look at the whole period so you can capture the ups and downs. Because when the ups are limited, that's forever. That's compounding. You're going up 3% from this level, not 3% or 18% from that level. If you look at, in fact, I have this here. Chart 1 in my testimony shows the blue line is the actual change. It's not the value, it's the rate of change in ag land value. Again, this is all from PVD history. So you can see the roller coaster here. It was going down, and then it shot up. I mean, here at the peak, it went up 17.5% in 2014. And then it went up another 16%, and then 14%. So what we tried to do in estimating the impact going forward, which I'll get to in a second, is to replicate that roller coaster, but at more conservative increases. So you can see out here, the orange part is the future, and there is the continuing decline, and then a rise, and then another continuing decline, but at lower rates, because I didn't want to assume it would be as much to try to take a more conservative. Chart 2 is what happens to those values with the limit. So there's the declines, but once it starts up, it can't go above 3%. And that's enormous compounding. And then it goes down, and then it comes back up, but it's limited at 3%. So you have to go back and look at the whole period, because ag is so different. It runs this roller coaster unlike any other class of real estate or even personal property for that matter. You have to look at the whole thing. And that's why you get these changes. Now, if you look at tables, you look into the future, and we try to add, what we find is that in the future, we allowed for a 6% increase each year in residential, a 5% increase in commercial and industrial, and then that assumption for ag. And what we find, and for the mill rate, we allowed it to go up so that there was a 4% property tax increase each year. I don't know if that's what they would do, but 4% actually is where it was, roughly about 3.8, before we hit these valuation spikes. You go back to look at the annual tax increase prior to 2021. So I went back, so we raised the mill rate enough to still produce a 4% increase. And what we find is over the first 10 years, ag would save $777 million, residential saved $3.2 billion, and commercial was $151 million. So there's still savings. Now, the reason that I think that the KLA numbers were showing an impact, a negative impact in that period, is they hadn't gone all the way back. Because there are times where that would be the case. So again, if you go back and look at tables 3 and 4, you see, and this is looking back at the history, from 2005 to 2012, ag wouldn't have gotten the benefit because they were having declining values. And so if you compare, I'll just pick 2008. So in 2008, ag land paid $164 million. Under the assumptions we made, they'd pay $167 million that year. They weren't getting any benefit. But look at what happens to the change once you go beyond 2012, where valuations spiked. In 2014, ag actually paid $229 million. Under this scenario, it'd be $188 million. Go down to 2019. Instead of $395 million, it would be $243 million. That's part of that is the compounding impact of not allowing that base to go up double digits for many years. So there was a comment, many comments yesterday, and which I agree with. We need both. The assessment limit is one part of the variable. And that's all that this bill can deal with in a constitutional amendment, perhaps. We also need the limit on the mill rate increases above revenue neutral that several conferees, I think opponents and proponents, both said they favor. We need that also. And the reason is, I want to show you, this is in my testimony too. This is an actual situation. So in 2024, Seward County, the City of Liberal, the Liberal School District, and Seward County Community College collectively only raised their tax revenue between 1% and 2%. So they would have been under, let's say, a 3% or a 4% limit on that mill rate increase. So a homeowner here that in 2023 had a $250,000 valued home, that homeowner gets a 15% increase in valuation. So now it's at 287.5. That means that homeowner would have paid 13% more in property tax across all those jurisdictions. It would have gone from 5,280 to 5,966. With that limit, they'd be still paying $5,966. But if there was an assessment limit, that 13% increase becomes 1% based on them charging the same mills. Now, they probably would have charged higher mills, and maybe they end up with a 3 or a 4 or even a 5% increase, but it's not 13. And this goes back to the affordability issue, that the mill cap absolutely would help a lot of people, but it wouldn't help the people who are getting these double-digit increases, and we know that's going to continue. They're still hung out to dry. And you go back and look, and my testimony has the increases by county. A lot of these big increases are coming in rural counties. I mean, this is not an area where you're seeing enormous increases in income to be able to pay. Since 1997, just to show you what has taken place, this is in total. We've seen a 12% population increase, an 85% increase in inflation. Education tax is up 207%. This is all the local. The rest of local government is up 253%. Again, this is not affordable, and it's not a necessary increase. We can't be going up to, and this is the average. In some cases, it's 4, 5, 6 times inflation plus population. Governments can operate much more efficiently. We've done so much research on this, on their actual spending, even looking at per resident spending. It is all over the map. People in similar sized counties, one county is spending 2 or 3 times as much per resident as another. It's consistent. They also, Senator Corson, you asked about carryover cash values, great, or cash reserves, great question. It's in the billions. It's in the billions, and that's only looking at 35 counties and 25 large cities. So for example, it's, I mean, you talk about unnecessary. Overland Park, 49% of their general fund in reserve. While each year we see dozens of school districts with less than 12%. And 49%, Overland Park, unfortunately, isn't an outlier. There are a lot, and in fact, it tends to be the larger ones that are charging the highest property tax increases that happen to have the largest cash reserves. And we all know how cash reserves come about.
Dave, I'm going to have to pull you back in on the bill. We've got another conference.
Okay.
So.
Sorry about that. So let me just conclude by saying that we're in a crisis right now. You've all heard it from residents. We have basically the patient is bleeding out, to use a medical analogy. And they're looking to the legislature to put a tourniquet on. This bill doesn't solve all the problems, but it absolutely stops the bleeding for the people who cannot afford to pay the property tax increases. And I know there's concerns, and I think a lot of them are legitimate. But to stay with the medical analogy, we all probably take medication where there's warnings about potential side effects. And what we have to do is weigh the benefits against the potential harm. And for me, it comes down on, we have to put the tourniquet on that patient and protect them. So again, the locals created this, but really only you can fix it. And we encourage you to report it favorably for passage. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Schallenberger.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. It's always interesting to see people who've studied issues. I think I've kind of assumed, and I forget, I was a mayor at one time, and that the mill levies or the taxes are not taxed uniformly. Because if you live in the county, you pay a county tax, but you don't pay a city tax. If you live in the city, you pay a city tax and a county tax, and then the school districts are on top of it. Have you done any research about who is raising taxes more? The counties, the cities, the schools? Because in my county, in Cherokee County, I think the counties kept they've hit the revenue neutral rate every time except one. And it seems like the cities wait and see what the county budget's going to be, and if there's any slack, they take it up. But
Yeah.
have you done any research on that?
We have, and we've done it relative to the revenue neutral impact. And what we've seen is it's really all over the map. There are in fact, there are 48 counties that last fall decided not to raise property taxes in this year. They stayed revenue neutral. Now, the ones who increased went from maybe 2% or 3% to double digits. The same with cities. 271 cities are not raising property tax this year. But there are some, like Overland Park, hate to keep picking on you, but 8, 9%. So, I mean, it really is. Several dozen school districts are holding revenue neutral, and yet others are imposing large. So it really is all over the map. The interesting thing about that is that all of them are able, if they choose, to reevaluate their spending and not raise taxes. These decisions can be made, and I think that's a lesson, because if you put this in place, they're going to be looking hard at how much they think they can raise the mill without bringing out the pitchforks.
Senator Owens.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dave, thank you very much for this detailed research. I, like you, feel like moving to an assessment limit makes more sense than the appraised limit from last year. That being said, you reference this poll somewhat regularly, and I'm curious, obviously, how we word polls matter, how we ask the question. Can you tell me the exact wording, and was there any explanation as to what an assessment limit is, how it would work, and the actual effect of it when the question?
Yeah, it's actually in my testimony, Senator. The state constitution, how do you respond to this? Strongly agree, strongly disagree, and so forth. The state constitution should be changed to limit annual increases in taxable assessed valuations.
So that was just the question? No
That was the question.
precursors, no explanation of what?
No explanation, just a straight question. We did ask other questions I didn't put in here, like, would you say that how would you say your property tax evaluations have been over the last 3 years? Are they way too high but not bad, perfect, and so forth? 46% said way too high. I think 29% high, but maybe not excessively high. I think it was 13% said they're just about right. I mean, so yeah, people understand that it's their assessed value that is driving these increases.
Thank you very much.
By the way, that's a low margin of error on that poll. It was in September, it was 3.7 percentage points.
Yeah, no, it's great information. I was just curious about the understanding and the wording.
Sure.
Thank you.
Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I hope these can be answered quickly. Thank you very much for the information about the comparison. Do you feel that if this constitutional amendment was enacted, that would then lock in place the increased amount of property tax that's being paid by the residential sector?
It would, property tax, of course, it's going to vary by individual. Collectively, what it will do is dramatically reduce the rate of increase in the future. It is going to save people untold millions of dollars over time.
I think my concern was we've seen the increase in the percentage that residential is paying, and you acknowledged that the other sectors went down. And so this would may lock that in place rather than,
Oh, you're talking about the share of the, no, I don't believe so. But let's say let's assume it does. I don't care if my share is the same if I'm paying a few $billion less. And people
And I
pay
have
their
one- I have-
taxes with
I have one
dollars,
other
and so I think that's what really matters to them.
I have one other question, and that is, you said in these other states, we haven't seen any areas of concern when this assessment has been enacted. Have you looked at the information about the percentage of the share of homeowners under the age of 45, which is higher in Kansas than in those other states?
No, what I said was the people who had concerns about the impact, negative impacts of this, hadn't shown that there had been any negative impacts in states that have them.
And Madam Chair, then my concern was, I would be concerned about the percentage of homeowners under the age of 45, and if that is different, I see that as an issue.
But what this would do, Senator, to try to respond to your question, is make it a heck of a lot easier for people in those lower age groups to buy homes because the property taxes wouldn't go up. I mean, property tax is a big deterrent, along with the interest rate, to young people buying homes. And if we prevent these from the runaway, I've talked to realtors who've said even some young people who buy homes, they can afford it when they buy it. 2-3 years later, we can't do this now. This will make it easier for younger people to buy homes, I believe.
Thank you. Senator Klemp, then Senator Starnes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Dave. One of the things I think was helpful in your testimony is table 3 and 4, where you've actually made an assumption of an increase in the mills where there is that shift. And I think that provides a tool for some of the folks that may have been on the sidelines to understand the value of if there is this shift, which is kind of one of the arguments that we're hearing. And as we've spent, well, it's years, but for me, last year, going through your data, I feel like as we explored numerous other ways to alleviate the pain of at the doors, and I'm blessed that I have a county that is supporting the cap and then another that's probably not, as well as cities that are actually supporting. So we have a lot of municipalities and opponents that have strong opinions. However, I have cities that are reaching out saying we support this. So when I look at those, it's having a tool that can go and we didn't have this last year at as clear as it is now, where there's this assumed shift. Do you have an opinion so you put in a 5% increase in the mills as a result of that in your analysis, I think is what I heard you say. Do you have an opinion with how do we get this information, especially out west where we might be having the most of our challenges with some of the folks that need to take a vote on this? How do we get that information that their constituents I think you said 80% are supporting a cap? And it's not your job to figure out how to communicate it, but maybe you have an opinion on how do we start to get that information into the hands where we can make a real decision with that information?
Well, we're willing to do whatever is necessary. Certainly, by the way, it was 5 times the rate of increase. It wasn't 5%. But it was, instead of like less than 0.5%, it was over 2% increase each year, looking back. We'd be happy we'll go where we're invited. So you want us to come to caucuses, we're going to email it and so forth.
Definitely not on the bill. So
Okay.
we're about out of time. So Senator Starnes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here. So my county that I represent, according to this, the city and county was held revenue neutral in 2024, And then people ask, then why are my taxes going up? So the idea, again, that we must address the caps on both sides. It's very clear and very evident. The other thing is, I'm hearing from all the conferees, there's a problem with property tax. So my point is, when are we going to look at some form of a consumable tax, other than for food, to take care of the property tax issue?
There are a number of states, Senator, that are looking at that, and we would love to look at it. I would say that that's going to take 2 or 3 years to really do the research, because a lot of the data doesn't exist. And so we need to put that tourniquet on now, but absolutely, it would be good to look at that down the road.
Thank you. Committee, we do have 2 more conferees. Thank you, Dave. So Eric, do you feel like you could finish up, or do you want to come back next week? Okay. Okay. And then Randy, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank goodness for Dave. I thought I was going to have to entertain you for an hour, and I don't know if I have the attention span for that. Eric Stafford with the Kansas Chamber. Good morning, and appreciate the opportunity to be here. Couple things. Dave mentioned the uniform application and uniform and equal application. Back in 2015, 2016, the legislature passed a provision dealing with the appeals process for taxpayers that if you're successful in your appeal, some of the proponent testimony that has been stated, and I'll get to our neutrality here in a minute, is that, you know, we might be successful in appeal, but then they come back the following year and then they bump our property taxes up. So we had a bill in 2015, 2016 that basically, if you were successful in your appeal, you got a 2-year freeze on your property. And I believe it was Johnson County who sued over that, and the Supreme Court said that violates uniform and equal. So that is something to keep in mind, but it is an issue for taxpayers. I do want to give credit to the proponent yesterday, the lady who spoke, and one of the best quotes I've ever heard, that taxpayers are not an endless piggy bank. That was fantastic. But I think you can read in our testimony that again, our neutral position, we do believe that this revised version is a slight improvement based on the last versions that really focused only on the assessed value. But we do still maintain the position that we are concerned about a potential cost shift. You know, we don't have data that shows that will happen. I'm sure there's data out there that shows that it won't, potentially data that shows that it will, as some of the opponents spoke about yesterday, specific to ag properties. But again, I do think it is a valid point, but I don't think you guys are trying to mislead anybody by saying that, you know, this isn't intended to, this does nothing to provide immediate property tax now. I don't think anybody's denying that, but we have to do something, I think, is the motivation here of trying to prevent the large future growth. But I wanted to bring up today, and there's a reason why I was looking through KPI's Green Book and sourced their chart here of local government employment in Kansas. In order to truly address property taxes as legislators, the hard conversation that's going to happen is Kansas having 4,000 taxing entities, 105 counties, 286 school districts, which the last time I heard the numbers back in 2014 from Representative Jerry Lunn, 144 of those had less than 500 kids. So how do we not be third highest in the nation per capita public sector employment behind Hawaii and New York, and get us to be 20th or 25th? Because the one of the only few things that are similar, yes.
These are great points, but I'm going to have to bring you back on the bill because we're out of time.
Okay.
If you want to come back another day and discuss that.
It's summarized in our written comments, but it's important. I'll just close by saying I was doing just some quick co-pilot research, and we've got 9 counties that have fewer than 5,000 residents, and we've got 38 that have fewer than 10,000.
I'm going to warn you on your AI systems too. They're not always accurate, but okay, keep going.
Yeah, I'm
sorry.
done. Happy to answer questions, Madam Chair.
Garbage in, garbage out. Sorry. I mean, Senator Clem.
Thank you for that condensed banter, comments there. So a quick question. With some of the information from KPI, and that shows with some increase and a shift that does happen, And it helps, potentially, if you look at that data, it does help commercial. Why would you sit in a neutral state or neutral slightly positive state and not shift over to a positive?
I'm not, this isn't specific to Mr. Trobert. I'm just, have been doing this long enough, and I've sat in enough committee hearings that anybody can make the data what they want it to be, right? And I'm not saying that that's the case. I do believe that the work that they've done on this is thorough, but it is a concern of ours. And I will say our sentiment among property taxes in the business community continues to remain very high. Dave mentioned that we were assessed at 25% versus residential 11.5%. So it is a concern for the business community, and I'm not denying that. But again, I think it is some of the information that's been out there last year is how residential has taken on a larger portion of property taxes. That could be true, but how many more homes are there in Kansas in 2026 than there were in 1992? I think we have experienced significant growth in the state on residential properties. So I'd be curious to know the number of housing units that we have today versus 30 years ago. Yeah.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Schallenberger, then Senator Owens.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be quick. I sat on a bank board, and at the bank board, the guy sitting beside me complained a month or two ago about his property tax. And he has 2 commercial properties, probably 40 different pieces of ag land. He's invested in that, and 2 houses. And I said, well, what got you? He said, my home. He said, my home value went up. And it reminded me, he didn't say anything about his ag land. I checked yesterday, it went down. And his commercial property stayed flat. But all the people that own ag land and all the people that own commercial are people that live in houses. And so if you look at this from a commercial perspective, yeah, there may be a shift. But there's also going to be a reduction in the increase for those years where the spikes are. It just gets frustrating when groups that represent people that live in houses focus on commercial property or ag property when everybody gets a break. All those people get a break if we do something for residential. So that's a comment, I guess, not a question, unless you have a comment.
Okay. Senator Owens.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know time is short, but Eric, you touched on something that I couldn't agree with more. We have got to deal with the level of government and the number of government entities if we're ever going to effectively control any level of tax in the state of Kansas. And just for perspective, the Kansas Insurance Department shows 37 counties with less than 5,000 residents, for perspective. And the Kansas Department of Education shows 30 districts having less than 200 students and 10 with less than 100.
Senator,
So
I
we do have
appreciate
to
the
look at
facts.
those perspectives.
I love it, but I've got one more conferee. I've
Thank
got
you.
to stay on the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Sorry.
Guys, I feel like a referee. Yeah. So thank you, Eric, for your testimony. Randy, he did submit written and asked to be switched to oral. And thank you, Randy.
I know we're really short on time, so one sentence very quickly. Randy Stuckey today on behalf of Renew Kansas Biofuels Association. This is the ethanol plants in the state of Kansas. We have about 12 ethanol plants located across the state of Kansas, mostly in small rural areas. They employ about 65 to 70 people, well above average salaries in those communities. They increase the price of the basis of the price of corn. They're very important. The reason I tell you that is because they're also the largest taxpayer in most of those counties. These are very large, complex properties. Think about something that you'll see with a bunch of, not buildings, but like a refinery or something like that. That's what you're seeing. Tens of millions of dollars in value. The problem is the outside hired tax appraisers want to say that those are worth about hundreds of millions of dollars in value. And so every year, at least half of these plants in the state of Kansas go through these, at least the informal process of finding what the true value is. It's very expensive. They have to hire outside appraisers. They have legal fees of thousands and tens of thousands of dollars every year. The point of this is that this bill, the reason why we support it, obviously, is that if you can put a 3% cap on that assessment rate every year, once you find true value, then your next year is going to be no more than 3% increase on that assessed value. We're not going to have this every year with more and more litigation, and it is litigation, or at least hiring outside appraisers. And that's the state of the law for, the state of the process, anyway, for this industry in the state of Kansas. It's abysmal, and it's awfully expensive for an industry who gives back so much and invests so much into the state of Kansas and rural economy. So appreciate your support on this measure. Because we're complex properties, I wanted you to hear that message because it's not just residential. It's also important to very large complex industries. So stand for any questions.
Thank you, Randy. I don't think there's any questions after. Are there any questions, committee? Seeing none. Thank you very much, Randy. I'd like to thank all our conferees. I was going to ask if there's anybody else to speak, but we don't have time. So if you do, please submit written testimony and we'll make it part of the record, whether you're a proponent, opponent, or neutral on the testimony. I would like to announce to the committee that I plan to take action on this legislation the 27th. We will be working it, so if you have any, please do your homework and study where you're at. We will have 2 post-audit presentations also on the 27th, and we've got to get Eddie in front of us on his presentation. We'll be working that in, but I just found out they want our budget out of here for the Department of Revenue and for BOTA by February 2nd. So we will be looking at those budgets the 28th and the 29th. So I would like to get those in your hands this week. I will try to get them emailed to you tomorrow, or so that you can have them in advance. But if you don't get them, please reach out. Is there any other business to be brought before the committee? I do need to close the hearing. I am going to close it instead of extending it another day on 1616. So the hearing's closed. Any other business? Seeing none, we're adjourned. Thank you for your work, committee.